Welcome to the Small Business Sessions podcast from Enterprise Nation's Business Connected training program and our partners Vodafone Business, Constant Contact, Dropbox and JP Morgan. In this week's episode, I'm joined by Saasha Celestial-One, co-founder of local sharing app Olio. The idea for Saasha's groundbreaking business came about when her business partner Tessa Clark trawled the streets looking for someone who might be able to use her spare food when she was moving house. The two friends tested their solution in a WhatsApp group for neighbours in North London, and Olio is now an app used by millions around the world for finding what they need and sharing what they don't with local people. In the show, we discuss Saasha's top tips for launching and growing a successful app, how entrepreneurs can use business to benefit the environment, and her thoughts on the UK as a good place to grow a technology company. So Saasha, welcome to the Small Business Sessions podcast.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So to start with, do you want to tell me, how did you come up with the idea for Olio in the first place?
So believe it or not, we're actually now in our 10th year. And the idea for Olio came about in the summer of 2015. One of my best friends and also someone who I met at business school a way back and someone I've tried starting a business with a few times. We were actively looking for an environmental challenge that we could tackle at scale. And we were doing this big sweep of the market to try and identify a market inefficiency or a gap in the market so that we could build something. And we actually came up empty-handed while we were doing that sort of formal process. We're both ex-consultants, so we were following a pretty methodical approach. And just when we were about to give up, Tessa, my co-founder, was moving house. And on moving day, she found herself with some non-perishable food that she should have been able to pack. And the removal people said, absolutely not. You can't pack it. Throw it away. She grew up on a farm. She was not going to throw that food away for obvious reasons. And so she actually went out on the street in the middle of winter with two small kids and tried to find someone to give it to. And in frustration, because she couldn't find anyone, it was embarrassing. It didn't work. It was cold. She was crying. She ended up smuggling the food in her boxes anyway. And that was the light bulb moment for Olio, because it seemed really insane that the only way to give good food to someone who, because obviously this food should be eaten, not thrown away, was to go around and literally knock on people's doors. There was an app for sharing everything, so why not for food? And that was just boom. Within an hour of her telling me that story, we'd named the company, sort of come up with like a really light business plan, and it was, we were on the express train.
That's great. So how did you go about then creating the first app for Olio?
So creating an app, it can either be a really big, huge, complex task, or it could be super light. And neither of us are technical, and we really didn't know where to start. First thing we did is talk to as many people who created apps, big ones, little ones, at different stages of their journey as we could. But also, sort of the main challenge for us actually was not so much creating the app, which is relatively straightforward, but proving before we invested in, because we were bootstrapped, invested in building the app, that people would actually use the app. So there's a great book called The Mom Test, which I recommend for any aspiring entrepreneur who has an idea and wants to properly test it before they invest in building it, bringing it to market. And that book really inspired us to, even though we knew we wanted to build this app for sharing food, there were a lot of people who were skeptical, who really didn't quite get the concept or understand why someone would want to go and pick up surplus food from their neighbor. And so we did a proof of concept. It was really straightforward. We recruited 12 people who lived locally that we didn't know, and one store, and we put them all in a WhatsApp group. And we asked them over the next 2 weeks to share any surplus food that they didn't have. And for if anyone saw anything they wanted, to request it. And it was pretty straightforward. And over those 14 days, we saw 26 successful shares. And when we debriefed with everyone at the end, everyone said that it was just a really lovely experience, that they met people in their neighborhood they'd never met before. And oh, by the way, we don't really need to build anything that's much more complicated than a WhatsApp group. So that helped us, because we had this big vision for what our MVP was going to look like, with ratings and maps and filters and all kinds of sort of snazzy features. And actually, based on the feedback from the proof of concept sort of WhatsApp group, we stripped it right back and we were able to launch it super quickly. We ended up finding an agency just outside of Bristol who, in exchange for a small equity stake, covered the cost of building the app, the MVP, with, I guess, in sweat equity. So we got quite lucky.
Wonderful. So what's your advice for building a successful app and generating users to that app?
Well, I think you need to build something apps are just everywhere these days. In fact, just yesterday, I decided to clean up my phone and I deleted 50 different apps that I hadn't touched in a long time. And so I think it's less, building an app is just almost table stakes. That's how people expect to interact with a brand, product, or service. So taking the question maybe a step back, my advice for building a business, because most of it, unless it's a B2B business, like any consumer-facing business, is probably going to have some type of app interface. I guess is to build something that people actually really want to use, and to make sure that you've got pull from users, which you can measure, and also by pull, it's how you can measure by how frequently, for example, your community refers other people to your community. So we have about 70,000 signups every month to Olio that are completely organic, and that's just existing users referring other users. So my advice would be to find a very small number of people who really love whatever it is that you want to bring up to market. They will be incredibly forgiving, and they won't care if your app is really basic or even non-existent. But if they are so passionate about what you're building that they tell all their friends and family so that you can grow this organic user base, then you will sort of have solved the issue of whether you should be building something in the first place, whether or not it's actually going to bring value to anyone. And the reason I say that is there's so many people, or I see so many ideas where people think of something that they want to build, but they just never really validate it with with their audience, with their target audience, and they don't have that pull. And then when they launch it, and it's usually something that's definitely not an MVP, and it falls a bit flat, it's incredibly disappointing. It's a big waste of time and resources. So make sure that you've got genuine pull from your audience, measured by whether or not they make some commitment, whether they put their credit card down, or they invite 5 friends, or they give you their home address, or whatever it is that they do, and whether or not you can get those individuals to refer other people, because you need to have that word of mouth in order to acquire new customers.
That's a great tip. So what about funding? So how have you funded your business, and how have your funding needs changed as your business has grown?
So we have funded the business through 5 rounds of private financing. We've got a mix of sort of Silicon Valley VCs, Excel, Octopus, although Octopus is London-based. And then we also have some social impact funds, and we also have high net worth individuals, and we have a few hedge funds. So we've got a whole variety of different investors. The common theme is marketplace, really consumer marketplace. So at its heart, Olio is a marketplace of a multi-sided marketplace where people can buy, sell, give, take, food, non-food, lend, borrow, sort of endless amounts of things that you can do in the app, all centered around hyper-local, sustainable, money-saving, anti-waste. Our funding needs haven't really changed. We've just needed capital, patient capital. We always said we needed patient capital. And by that we meant we were very upfront with investors that we were tackling a really complicated problem. The scale of food waste is monumental. 40% of all the world's food goes to waste. And it wasn't going to be a 3 to 5 year exit plan. It was going to be, a 10 to 15 year plan. It takes a long time to build marketplaces. And so we were honest and upfront with our investors about the type of capital we needed, which was patient capital, but also the way we found our investors was because we're tackling such a big problem that affects everyone, and the issue of food waste really is quite an emotional one because it obviously is linked to things like food poverty, and it also just goes against all of our natural instincts as humans to let good resources go to waste when there are people going without. And so the story we told at all stages, regardless of what type of investor we were selling, was a real human story and a story of huge opportunity and scale, because the value of food that goes to waste every year is $1.2 trillion, which is a lot of money. It's a big market inefficiency. And so that means that there's, fixing it, there's obviously going to be some economic upside for entrepreneurs to come in, for people who can solve that. So I guess what I'm trying to say as well, though, is over the last 9-10 years, the external environment has changed drastically. And what kind of messaging, what kind of traction, what kind of, I guess I would say, I think we probably got really lucky with the time in which we were able to raise. We were able to raise on a big vision. Now, a lot of businesses or a lot of investors are looking for really strong sort of core business fundamentals, which makes it harder to tackle something that's really trying to challenge the status quo from a social or environmental perspective. So that's a long-winded answer in that we've raised from everyone. Everything's changed, and anyone who's trying to raise money right now really needs to think about the current macroeconomic environment and fundraising environment rather than what happened 10 years ago.
No, it's not long-winded at all. It's really good to get insights, particularly on a thing like funding. So on to the next question. How have you built relationships with big organizations like supermarkets, and what advice would you give to other business owners who want to do the same?
I wish there was a single piece of advice I could give other entrepreneurs with regard to how to unlock enterprise sales. Unfortunately, there's not. And it's been a source of frustration, but also great sort of pride when you do unlock a big supermarket. And we now work with, I don't know, something like 7 out of the 10 largest supermarkets in the UK, and have been nationwide with Tesco, Iceland, Sainsbury's, etc. for a while. So in the beginning, what we did was a lot of what I might call mild stalking right now, which is Tesco specifically is the one that I can really bring that example to life. The CEO at the time, back in 2017, made a public commitment to have zero edible food waste across all of Tesco by the end of, I think it was 2017. This was a really big, bold commitment. And we thought, well, they've said it out loud now. We're going to hold them to account. And I actually ended up meeting Dave Lewis, who was the CEO at the time, several times, because I attended events where he was speaking, and I would wait in line and I'd go up and I'd talk to him afterwards. And he knew who Olio was long when we were a 5-person company. And over time, we were able to sort of establish our credibility by building relationships, even though we were super subscale, with the decision makers who were looking at putting together a strategy to actually unlock this big, bold vision. So that was like understanding what businesses are saying publicly, who is saying that, finding ways to meet them in real life, not just LinkedIn, not just tagging, not just Twitter or X, whatever it's called. Like, I think meeting people in real life, if there's just no substitute to sort of shortcutting the path to building relationship, establishing credibility. That said, there's only so much you can do to influence the pace of decision making at different organizations. There's one large supermarket that we actually, I would say, courted, quote unquote, for nearly 6 years. And it was, the time wasn't right. It wasn't a priority for them. They had other sustainability priorities that weren't food waste. And they needed to see those through. And they were going to do that in their own time. There was nothing we could say or do to accelerate the sales cycle. But when they were ready, and they knew who we were, because we had kept up the relationship over anyway, and they came to us, and we ended up rolling out nationally at over 1,000 stores in less than 2 months, which was the fastest rollout we'd ever done. So with supermarkets, it's, I think it's a matter of like being incredibly patient, recognizing there's only so much you can do to evolve the conversation, but making sure that you build the relationships, even if it could be years before a partnership actually comes to fruition.
Big thanks to Vodafone Business for sponsoring this podcast. VHub from Vodafone Business has supported over 1 million SMEs, providing expert advice on a range of topics that matter to small business owners everywhere. Access VHub for a free one-to-one consultation with an expert advisor and get support tailored to your business. Book your free consultation with a VHub advisor today. Find more details at vodafone.co.uk/VHub. What about innovation then? So how do you continue to innovate with Olio?
Innovation is the fun part of building your own business. I mean, I literally woke up at 3:30 this morning with something that I couldn't wait to write down and send to my co-founder. I waited till 5 because otherwise it just felt crazy. But like, you just get into this creative mindset that is self-reinforcing, especially if you've got a co-founder or a team where you're bouncing ideas off each other all the time. But these ideas come from using and experiencing the value proposition yourself. So as I mentioned to your colleague, I'm going to go pick up something on Olio later today. I give away on Olio all the time. Like I do collections from supermarkets and I distribute that food in a volunteer capacity. So in experiencing that and walking in my customer's shoes, I see new product, new features and improvements that we could make constantly. I wish I had a million engineers so we could do them all. But we also regularly survey our users in all different kinds of like small surveys, big surveys, et cetera, to get feedback. Obviously, AI is great for summarizing feedback now, and talk to our clients, which are all the supermarkets and caterers, and find out from them, what we could do to get them to donate more food to our community. Because ultimately, we're an impact. We measure our success in terms of how much food we rescue and redistribute, how many household items are kept out of landfill, and that's all about scale and impact. So the innovation is around unlocking additional impact.
So what are your thoughts on the UK as a good place to build a tech business?
I haven't built one anywhere else, but I did go to Stanford Business School, and I sort of have a good sense of what it would be like to have done that in the Valley, because I've got loads of friends who work there or have founded companies there. I do think, I'm probably a bit biased, but I think that London specifically and the UK serve entrepreneurs really well, especially tech entrepreneurs. First of all, it's like £13 in 2 days. It takes almost no effort to even just start a company, right? So the barrier to forming a company is really low. The EIS and SEIS investment schemes are some of the best tax incentives in the world in terms of helping to de-risk investment, friends and family angel investment into startups. R&D tax credit, although there's some nightmares going on with HMRC clawing that back right now, unfortunately. But that's also a really good incentive for tech founders. But also, there's Tech Nation, there's the London Mayor's Business Program, there's countless accelerators and just support systems. And finally, I think I haven't yet to meet a founder that's an asshole, if I'm honest. Everyone is just so nice to each other. And very professionally generous, sharing experiences, sharing watch-outs, giving sort of their unfiltered view on their own experience so that people don't need to reinvent the wheel. So I think it's pretty good.
Wonderful. So what is your tips for other business owners who are looking to build a business that helps the environment, like you do with Olio?
My advice to entrepreneurs who want to help the environment is to make sure to build a business that is commercially sound. And because if you're only focused on solving an environmental problem, but you're not also figuring out how to generate an exciting return on capital for your investors, it's not a business, it's a nonprofit. And it's really challenging to not have a clear identity. And it's highly likely that you'll need to raise money from non-environmental or non-impact investors. And therefore, the business case and the opportunity has to be super exciting for someone who literally does not care about the environment. So make sure that whatever environmental problem you're solving, that the greater commercial impact you deliver to your shareholders, you'll also be, by definition, delivering greater environmental impact, so that you never run into the risk of having those go in two separate directions, there being a conflict of interest. And also really consider joining, like becoming a B Corp and, putting yourself in the community of other like-minded founders and companies so that you can learn from their experience.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. So if you had to give one, though, ultimate tip for business success, what would it be?
My ultimate tip for building a successful business is to surround yourself with people who love and support you and really care about the journey. And that's because it can be a really isolating journey. And your partner, your kids, your parents, they're not always going to understand why you're completely obsessed, because it is a bit like becoming possessed, right? Like you can sometimes, like, it's all you can think about. And you need to have, ideally, a co-founder with whom you can go to who's 100% experiencing the same ups and downs and highs and lows that you are, because it's a huge amount of responsibility, especially if you're employing people. Those people have got families, they're taking out mortgages. It's a huge responsibility, and I think it's personally, I'm not sure I would be able to do it alone. So I'm very grateful for my co-founder, and my number one piece of advice: make sure you've got a co-founder that you're not going to get divorced from, because you'll spend as much time with them as you will any other. I think my relationship with my co-founder is the healthiest long-term relationship I've ever had. So find your work wife or your work husband, if you can, and surround yourself with other founders and a tribe of people who understand what you're going through to help make the journey fun and bearable.
Now, that's a really good point. I mean, two heads are better than one, and I think it is really powerful having a co-founder. So what would you say in that relationship with your co-founder? What makes that relationship so special?
I think our relationship is really healthy because we've been friends for 20 years. So as I mentioned earlier, we went to business school together. So we've been friends for a long time, and our friendship, like good friends, our friendship is sacred. And I can honestly say that despite periods of sort of tension or sometimes not being 100% aligned, we've never once put our friendship at risk. And there's that boundary that's just a no-go red line. And that basically, I think, helps to really keep things in check. We have to always find a way out of any misalignment because the stakes are too high. Because we've got a friendship that came before.
Yeah.
So that's definitely one of the huge mutual respect, and a guardrail that we're both mutually agree is very precious, and that doesn't want to be violated or crossed. And then also we just, we talk to each other all the time. I mean, we message each other constantly. We have one-on-ones constantly. We have strategy days. We take our families on holiday together. So, just spend a lot of time together, have an open dialogue.
Well, Saasha, thank you so much. That was so good. Big thanks for joining us on the Small Business Sessions.
Thanks so much for having me. Nice to meet you, Dan.
You've been watching Enterprise Nation's Small Business Sessions podcast, powered by Business Connected and our partners Vodafone Business, Constant Contact, Dropbox, and JP Morgan. If you've been inspired during this episode, head to enterprisenation.com/business connected to register for webinars and to access free business training. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you next time.